Sri Bhagavan gives the instruction to know yourself. In this knowledge, being is itself the knowledge. It is undivided knowledge, non-dual knowledge, in that it has no alternative, and there is no division between a knower and the known. If you know yourself, your own being is found to be birthless, imperishable, undifferentiated, entirely formless, without condition, without state, immovable, immutable, and eternal. If you do not know yourself, the you that does not know does not exist. For the self is only one, without a second. Your existence is invariably singular. There are not two selves. The self is only one. So then, inquire within yourself, who am I? Abandoning any tendency to misidentify yourself with the body or its attributes, with the senses, with the mind. In other words, abandoning the tendency to misidentify with what is objective and not the self. Inquire deeply within yourself as to who am I? In the book entitled Who Am I?, the Maharshi says that silence is that in which no I arises, in which no I appears. In the book entitled Talks, he says, silence is I. How can he say both things? Silence is that in which there is no I, and silence is I. That in which misidentification with the body is gone, and in which there is no false assumption of individuality, is your true self. That is silence, the eyeless, true I. To know yourself is to abide in silence as silence. The knowledge is being. Being is self-luminous. Examine your own sense of existence. It is self-luminous and requires nothing else in order to know itself. At just such a depth, you should know your own nature. one true I exists. There is only one self, not a multiplicity of selves. There is neither a multiplicity of selves outwardly, which is imagined only due to relation to the body, nor is there a multiplicity of selves inwardly, as if there would be parts to you, higher and lower, a true self and a false self, a real self and an ego self, and so forth and so on. The self is only one. By profound inquiry, constant inquiry, know this self. It is this very self that the Upanishads declare to be Brahman. You cannot hear it. You cannot see it. It is not possible to study it like a topic. This has to do with your very being. When there appears ignorance, there is the need for true knowledge. Realizing true knowledge by knowing yourself. Ignorance is found to be non-existent. And steady knowledge is found to be the very nature of your existence, being, consciousness, bliss. Dive within and realize that which alone is truly real. And if at any point you have a question, please feel free to ask. Or if you wish to relate your own experience, please feel free to speak.
It's another name for the self-consciousness. Can we say the self is consciousness?
Yes, you can say that.
Also in the intimacy that exists between all the existent part of the universe into one part, the only part. It's like the real mathematics is 1 + 1 = 1. Because I heard so many times that 1 + 1 = 2.
As you are, all are. Are you one? Are you two?
But I can have that flexibility too. Like, from the different aspects of angular vision, of the eternal vision, is constantly manifesting and expanding.
According to the experiencer, so is the view. In the eternal, there is no difference whatsoever. For the unborn, there can be no talk of creation.
So where is the course, the lila?
It is according to the viewer of it. If God sees God with God's own eye, is there Leela?
So the greatest capacity of consciousness seems to dominate the lesser capacity of consciousness itself in the totality of relation that exists in that Leela.
What do you mean by consciousness?
Everything that prevails is consciousness. Every part of is only one. It's only consciousness. Everything is consciousness. But what I'm talking is about the manifestations of the part. Like it seems like you are there and I'm here, and it seems to be like you are the master and I'm the disciple. And then at the same time we're talking about one.
But who says all that? Who sees all that?
One part of the whole. For instance, the mind, which is dwell in duality.
The idea of a part is also just a thought.
But it's
whom?
It's a thought.
Inquire for whom are all these ideas? Parts, wholeness, manifesting, unmanifested. If we inquire as to for whom are these, and know ourselves, all the differences prove to be non-existent.
So the objective of the inquirer is to center in the self, itself.
It is the knowledge of the reality as it is, and nothing less. That knowledge is of the very nature of consciousness. Consciousness is self-luminous, and for consciousness there is nothing other.
And where occurs the differentiation and it seems like there is philosophies and books and schools and train of thoughts and differentiations and genders and countries and lines and invisible lines and Brahmanas and Krishnas and Shivas and India and United States and the other planets, the universe and quantum whatever, mathematics, chemistry, problems, not problem, happiness, not happiness, wisdom, stupidity. And it seems like the nations and the forgiveness of all these parts prevails in the world of mundane, mischievous behavior and miscomprehension and misunderstanding. Where did all this chaos come from?
You have summed that up. All of that is just a misunderstanding.
So this misconception occurs in so many millions and millions and millions of creatures.
The idea of millions is also a misunderstanding.
And so, and that point of misconceptions and me looking into as a witness of all these parts through my inquirer, then who am I?
If there is a deep inquiry, who am I, so that self-knowledge shines, there is no more misunderstanding. The root of such imagination proves to be absent.
And that's the Lila.
Call it by any name. First inquire, then say what is.
So I'm going to inquire really good.
Yeah, you should do that to the best of your ability.
So I don't want to deceive myself.
You won't. You won't be happy unless you know yourself.
So I'm usually happy, kind of like 99.99%. So I think I'm being blessed. Even the other one, I'm happy, so many people don't like their happiness. There's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstanding coming on my side. They say that it can be a mirror, like we become mirrors for observations of the, even as the misconception vanish, it still kind of become like an easy target. The biggest the consciousness, the most responsibility that is, to respond again and to the inquire, who am I, and to allow others to engage in that inquiry without reacting, but in the lila.
Remain without attachment, and you have equanimity. As for the rest, again, realize the nature of the self, the pure consciousness as it is. Then we'll see about all these other things.
Other than Leela, is there anything else which explains the origin of misunderstanding and miscomprehension? And
there are ever
self-inquiry or prerequisite to ask the question? I mean, why is it invalid to ask this before self-inquiry?
There are ever so many explanations. He offered one, called Leela. Someone else may give some other explanation. The explanations are only as real as that which they're trying to explain. Is illusion real? Any explanation of illusion is bound to be as illusory as the illusion itself. The explanations are only to wean us from the illusion, not to give us some solidified idea of this really happens. Other than inquiring, how else to know oneself? Without knowing oneself, how can one know what is real?
India has seen various saints and sons who, with worshipping personal God, they were able to achieve enlightenment, having a personal God. I mean, they did not talk of inquiry or only they talk of a personal God and getting absorbed in prayer and worship. How they achieve. And then I want to know, sir, what is actually how shall we explain enlightenment, sir?
It needs no explanation. It is proof in itself. Absorption is the key. We can say that the knowledge essence shines in the form of that devotion.
And what will be the stage of a person after reaching enlightenment? In this material world, how his attitude and outlook will be?
He'll be detached from all worldly things, happy at heart in the knowledge of himself, which is the highest devotion to God. Whether we speak in terms of knowledge or in terms of devotion, the ego sense, ego notion, dissolves. Its utter dissolution is complete absorption. That is the goal and nothing less. If that is realized within, one is abiding at the very source of all that is true, good, and beautiful.
You would have conquered all internal enemies like anger and all. No ill will, no animosity.
Ill will, animosity, anger, etc. have their root in ignorance. Where there is duality and the belief in one's own ego, egos of others, such things can arise. Where the ego is absorbed or utterly dissolved, such becomes impossible.
So, an exact practical technique of dissolving the ego.
What could be more practical than the inquiry as prescribed by the Maharshi? Who am I? Your existence you have with you always. You always exist. It is not an inert existence, it is a knowing existence. Grace is already there in abundance. It is limitless. If we turn within and make an earnest attempt to know ourselves, this is the most practical of practicality.
Is there a need to concentrate on a particular spot in the body?
Not concentrate on a particular spot on the body. It is not necessary. But once you get to the very root of that concentrative power.
The object of concentration should be?
On the non-objective. After all, one wants to know the self, not a part of the body or some objective phenomena.
Is that soul? Is that soul?
Is that all?
Soul.
Soul? What do you mean by soul?
The non-objective.
Then that soul is infinite and eternal, and only one.
Not very easy, sir.
Sri Ramana wrote in verse, self-realization is easy, the easiest thing there is. The difficulties prove to be only imagined. They seem solid, but when we make an earnest attempt to dive within, their solidity vaporizes, dissolves. There is really nothing obstructing the reality, nothing in the way of God, nothing preventing one from knowing oneself. The obstacles prove to be illusory, the stuff of imagination, Maya. Sri Bhagavan defined Maya as that which is not.
Mind is always wandering away when we are trying to bring it back. Again wandering. What is the best way of bringing it back?
You know that it wanders. What is it that so knows? No matter how long and how far it wanders, something knows before the wandering, during the wandering, after the wandering returns or is over. Something knows. That something is more you than wherever the mind wanders. Know that something, shining, unmoving.
That means one has to transcend the mind.
Yes, what is referred to as inquiry is mind transcendent entirely, likewise the knowledge. It is mind transcendent.
Thank you, Master. In your discourse in some of those dialogues, it brought me to mind of my first encounter with Maharshi's teaching, that one of the striking kinds of ways he would phrase responses was very striking to me. Produced like a uh-huh kind of feeling, and that uh-huh. And it was because I was familiar with science and sort of a strategic postponement that was inherent in that approach. And he seemed to be pointing to something like that. There'd be questions about the world, the body. And the phrase that really struck me is when he'd say, is the body coming to you and telling you it is the body? Does the world tell you it is the world? And I thought that was a very funny way of saying it, and it really struck me. But what I took it to mean was that first find out about yourself, because you're naming it the body. The body never comes, announces itself as the body, and you agree to go along with it. It doesn't work that way, or the world's the same way. It's in your terms that it is this, it is that. And so you're saying, before you worry about all those things, find out about yourself, who is the one naming all of those things, because they're not announcing themselves to you. And the deeper I went into it, what struck me also was that there was the continuity without beginning, without end, without form or boundaries, seamless. The sense of existence, that fit the teaching, where all those things I might have thought of first were all fractured into pieces and that came and went and were created and destroyed. So it was a redirection that was of a type I felt I was familiar with, but it was very, very striking, and I felt right away from the beginning that was very fruitful to first find out what I was talking about or thinking about, and then worry about, exploration.
All those parts, yes, you name them, you conceive them. Their existence depends on your awareness of them, or your conception of them, if you know the worlds within the mind. They do not stand up and declare their own reality, as it were. You say, I am such and such, and this is such and such. In between I and this, the two poles of duality, is stretched all the illusion. Of the two, this depends on I. The Maharshi said that what was the use of knowing all else without first knowing oneself? He then added, what else is there to be known when oneself is known? If there's an I, there is this. Is there an I?
that would be something that would be named as well. It would be on the same footing. I mean, it comes before the others, but it's of the same footing.
What then is real? There is reality. It is neither something, it is certainly not nothing. The reality comprehends itself. Brahman knows Brahman. Even all that is regarded as illusion is only that. You have known that as all this. The knower, the knowing, the known, all are just that. Brahman. Brahman is the only self that there is. There is no other kind of self. Is it clear?
As I mentioned before a few times, I've just started to inquire a lot more over the past month or so, read more scripture, but primarily just inquire as much as I can all the time. And the result is that everything that Ramana and the scriptures say about my nature is an understatement. It's both true, accurate, and it understates what one's experience of oneself truly is. And the unclarity, the doubts, the questions, they're all solved when I simply inquire. And it has another effect too, in that when one knows where to look, you keep looking there more often. It has a momentum that builds on itself so that the intensity that may have not seemed to have been there, that if I only had that intensity, I could inquire more deeply. That can only be solved by inquiring more deeply. It's not solved by trying to find some intensity in the mind or some concept of intensity or a stronger desire for liberation. When I actually inquire, everything that needs to be known becomes quite it becomes obvious in a way that I would not have predicted from a mind point of view in advance.
If it conformed to one's preconception, what good would it be? Whether it's the words of the Maharshi, scripture, inquiry, none of these conform to one's preconception. That is, limited conception.
Which is such grace, because if it did conform to it, it would be so limited I would not be interested in it.
It wouldn't be liberating.
No.
But that which does not conform to the imagined conceptions is that which liberates one from all the imagined bondage. Yes, the best way to learn to inquire intensely is to inquire intensely. Continuity of practice has its own power. Nevertheless, an aspirant can increase the intensity of his desire for liberation simply by reflecting on what is the true source of happiness. In what way will he be truly happy, without a break and without end? Immortal bliss is found only in one place. Again, there is the desire to know. To increase the intensity of one's practice. Keenly discern what you're attempting to know. If you determine that it is utterly non-objective, the innate intensity, which is really the vividness of reality itself, swallows all else, consumes it. Inquiry is in essence and substance pure knowledge. Pure knowledge, that is non-objective knowledge, is only consciousness. Is the intensity of consciousness measurable?
And when I think about that question that you just posed, anything of measure would be of the mind. And there's nothing in consciousness that in any way resembles a mind. if I inquire what is it that I mean when I say consciousness, the answer itself is the consciousness. And that I know directly. Do you have any more good questions?
What would you need to know?
Nothing, but I love when you ask questions like that because it just... maybe it's like when the rishis gathered to hear Dakshinamurti's silent teaching. Even though there's nothing really to hear, you just want to hear it over and over and over and just feel that knowledge continuously and without end. And so when you ask questions like that, that's why I like the questions.
The questions are expressive or indicative of the same ancient silence. That silence is perpetual. All the terms used to express the essential teaching are in truth only that same silence. When the Maharshi was manifestly silent, there was silence. When he spoke, there was still the same silence. The spirit and purpose of the questions is that one should not take for granted any kind of bondage, any kind of ignorance. Bondage is only ignorance. Ignorance is only false supposition. The suppositions seem to survive only due to lack of inquiry. If light is brought in to search for darkness, what happens to the darkness? Being nothing, it vanishes. So if you think this is, it is wise to first determine, is it so? Since the view of it is depends on the definition of I am, it is best to inquire, who am I? There is no need to affirm the truth. It is sufficient if the false is questioned. Then the reality, which was there always, stands self-revealed. To see the rope that is actually there, it is enough to question the illusion of a snake that was superimposed upon it through imagination. Imagination being put to an end, reality is self-evident. And you yourself are that reality.
Is that why this self is inconceivable and always new? The inconceivable is realized with a knowledge that is only being.
The human part of me, which I realize is an illusion, which is defined by me, likes to go back sometimes and contrast the differences between what I have experienced in my lifetime as a human, and then contrast that against the one. And as a human, I like to go back and say, well, okay, I have learned the following things, I've experienced the following things in different categories, and all of that experience is my experience right now. And that brings me to whoever I am right now, in this experience, this knowledge, this level of consciousness. And at the same time, I can pull myself out of the present moment and say, this is part of the eternal, ever-present moment. This consciousness is part of the one consciousness, which always was. And at the same time, if I look at it from that standpoint, I can say, I don't need to worry about what all has happened in the past. These are all things about doing, and doing has to do with events in time, which is all defined by man as a way of measuring the way things progress in their life. So eliminating all of those man-made definitions, I can say, this is who I am right now, in consciousness. And if I want to be one with the one universal consciousness, the thing to do instead of doing something is to be. And what I should try to be is bliss, for example. Now, if I can do that and be that, then does that put me where I want to be? And whenever I'm not in bliss, whenever I'm confused or frustrated or anything, it says, no, you're not there. You've slipped out of that spot. And my purpose then is to be bliss.
All right. So far the discrimination is fine. How do you propose to be bliss?
By forgetting about the linear progression of all these events that my mind wants to chronicleize and say, this is how I got to be where I'm at. If I can forget all of those definitions and say, that's just an illusion.
So it's not forgetting in the sense of loss of memory, but forgetting the definitions.
Yes. It's remembering who I am rather than all of this man-made, contrived memories and experiences and things like that. Those have always existed.
So then it is remembrance of who you are. Who you are must always be the same and is immovable. It is not subject to varying perspectives, but simply is, as it is, always. The tendency to return to a limited definition is only so long as one feels it is valid or has some degree of validity. When it is known to be entirely false, purely imagined, there's nothing in it for us. And you do not return to it, or rather you no longer conjure it up.
Well, I guess my question was, if what I'm trying to remember is that I am bliss, I am joy, I am peace, if that's what I'm trying to remember, if that's, not as a matter of doing, but just being that.
You are bliss, and you're intuitively drawn to your own nature. Affirmation of it will not make it more so. But if you deeply inquire as to your very nature, what it is, curious to know your very being as it is, and in the course of such, you cease to misidentify, that will suffice. And your nature, as being consciousness bliss, stands self-revealed. As long as there seems to be someone who goes in and out of that, the one who's attempting in earnest to seek it, as long as that one seems to be there, inquire to see what his definition is. Whatever definition is false, some thinking, some doing, etc., abandon it, strip it off. You abandon it by knowing that it's not really I. Go on like that till the irreducible substrate alone remains. Bliss knows itself. It has no need to affirm itself. It is so solidly itself that there's nothing contradictory to it.
So to be successful on the path of inquiry, that is to know who am I, it is said that the prerequisite is to purify the mind, to strengthen the mind. I want to know, is there any special technique to purify and strengthen the mind? Or by just inquiring into who am I, the mind automatically gets strengthened and purified?
The latter is the case. The inquiry itself is sufficient.
To strengthen the mind.
To strengthen the mind, to purify the mind. What else is purification but abandonment of the mind's imagination, the darkness of ignorance? What else is strength of mind but the ability for it to remain in its source without being differentiated as a mind? This comes by inquiry, to know oneself. Any other practice employed for purposes of strengthening and purifying the mind work to the extent that they contain the same knowledge essence, which inquiry is composed of solely. Otherwise, if one engages in some other practice and merely does it mechanically, without this knowledge essence, what good will there be? But where there is this knowledge essence, the diminishing of egotism, etc., there is success.
But how to overcome the obstacles on the way, sir?
What are the obstacles?
The mind always rolls in the future or rolls in the past. It doesn't stay in the present. Normally, the mind doesn't stay in the present. That is the obstacle.
The past, the present, and the future are all equally unreal. Consider them like the past, present, and future of a dream. The reality is timeless. Not the past, not the present, not the future. The supreme reality is time transcendent, being mind transcendent. That which transcends time and the mind is your true abode, your true self. Inquire into that true self to know it as it is. There is no obstruction between yourself and yourself. There's no room, no gap.
Aho aham namo mahyam daksho nastiha matsamaha asamsprishya sharirena yena vishwam chiram dhrutam.
Wonderful am I, adoration to myself. There is none so capable as I, who am bearing the universe for all eternity without touching it with the body.
Aho aham namo mahyam yasya me nasti kinchana adhava yasya me sarvam yadvang manasa gocharam.
Wonderful am I, adoration to myself who have nothing or all that is thought and spoken of.
Jnanam jneyam tadha jnata tritayam nasti vastavam ajnanad bhadiyatredam sohamasmi niranjanaha.
Knowledge, knower, and the knowable, these three do not exist in reality. I am that stainless self in which this triad appears through ignorance.
Dvaita mula maho dukkham nanyat tasyasti bheshajam drishyame tanmrisha sarvam Ekoham chidraso malaha.
Oh, the root of misery is duality. There is no other remedy for it except the realization that all objects of experience are unreal and that I am pure, one, consciousness and bliss.
Bodhamatrohamajnanad upadhikalpito maya evam vimrashato nityam nirvikalpo stitirmama.
I am pure consciousness. Through ignorance I have imposed limitations upon myself. Constantly reflecting in this way, I am abiding in the Absolute.
Name bandhosti moksho va bhrandishanta nirashraya aho mayisthitam vishvam vastuto na mayisthitam.
I have neither bondage nor freedom. Having lost its support, the illusion has ceased. O the universe, though existing in me, does not in reality so exist.
Sashariram idam vishvam na kinjididi nishchitam shuddha chinmatra atma cha tasmin tatkasmin kalpanadhuna.
I have known for certain that the body and the universe are nothing, and that the self is pure consciousness alone. So on what is it now possible to base imagination?
Shariram swarga narakau bandha moksho bhayam tadha kalpana matrame vaitat kim me karyam chidatmanaha.
Body, heaven and hell, bondage and freedom, as also fear, all these are mere imagination. What have I to do with all these? I, whose nature is pure consciousness.
Aho janasamuhepi nadvaitam pashyato mama aranyamiva samvrittam kvaradim karavanyaham.
Oh, I do not find any duality. Even the multitude of human beings, therefore, has become like a wilderness. To what should I attach myself?
Naham deho na me deho jivo naham aham kichit ayameva hi me bandha asidya jivite sprha.
I am not this body, nor have I a body. I am not jiva. I am pure consciousness. This indeed was my bondage, that I had thirst for life.
Aho bhuvana kalloler vichitre drag samusthitam mayananda maham bodho chittavate samudyate.
Oh, in me, the limitless ocean on the rising of the wind of the mind, diverse waves of worlds are produced forthwith.
Mayananta maham bodho chittavate prashamyati abhagya jiva vanijo jagatpoto vinashwaraha.
With the calming of the wind of the mind in the infinite ocean of myself, the arc of the universe, unfortunately for Jiva, the trader, meets destruction.
Mayananda maham bodha ashcharyam jiva vichayaha udyandi khnandi khelanti pravishanti swabhavataha.
How wonderful! In me, the shoreless ocean, the waves of individual selves according to their nature rise, strike each other, play for a time, and disappear.